This is question 45 from part 1 of the 2016 TSA paper. In this question we were asked which option best expresses the main conclusion of the argument. So first let's look at the argument. It says, many people criticise the younger generation for what older people regard as immoral behaviour. So this is what the writer is saying other people say. And they're not necessarily agreeing that the behaviour is immoral. Then they say the critics need to realise that because the world has changed, so have moral standards. Then they say technology is advancing so rapidly that only the young understand the world. Next, it is they, so that means young people, not their parents or grandparents who should be setting moral standards. They're saying that young people should be setting moral standards and not older people. It says, anyone over the age of 25 can't help but be blinded by what they learned in the past. Their education has prevented them perceiving and responding to the demands of the modern day. So that sentence and a half is saying the same thing twice, that over 25s can't perceive the modern world properly because of their education. And then at the end of that last sentence it says, so their moral judgments have no validity. And when it says there, it means over 25s because that's who it was talking about before. Okay, so now let's have a look at the structure of this argument and we can try to identify the main conclusion. Okay, so I'm ignoring the first two sentences because they're mostly setting up the issue the writer's talking about. There are a couple of points that they basically use as reasons for the rest of the argument. They say only the young understand the world because technology is advancing so fast. So nothing else talks about technology, so this is being introduced as a new thing. This has to be a reason rather than a conclusion. And we'll see in a second this is used to support other things in the argument. And then, in contrast to that, so it mentions the young understanding the world, and it talks about older people not understanding it. So these two are being used in contrast, to contrast the situations of the young and the old. And it says over 25s don't understand the modern world, basically they're blinded to it. So what things haven't I written as reasons? Well, in these two we've got a should and a so. So it looks like, in general, should statements, especially if they haven't been preceded, especially if they aren't followed by other should statements, are likely to be the conclusion, or a conclusion. And this has a so that's obviously being concluded from something. So these are both conclusions in the context of the argument. And we can see that each of these reasons supports one of these directly. So only young people understanding the world supports the claim that young people should be setting the moral standards. And over 25s not understanding the modern world supports the idea that their moral judgments don't have validity. Even if you don't agree with the writer, you should see that these are being used in support of these. So now we've got two conclusion-looking statements here, and we've got to figure out which is the main conclusion. So if one of these supports the other, then the one that's supported will be the main conclusion, because it's like at the end of the entire argument. So there are a couple of reasons to favour this as the main conclusion. One is we've got the should, and nothing else in the argument is about shoulds. So often that means the should is being introduced in the conclusion as a response to everything else. And also, we had the so here that shows this as a conclusion, but that's specifically tying it to the previous part of that sentence. So the so here is relating it just to this evidence, whereas this, or not evidence, but reason, whereas both of these reasons are supporting this conclusion. So while this conclusion is only supported by one reason, both of them are supporting this one. And it makes sense that if the moral judgments of older people don't have validity, then that means that it shouldn't be them who's setting the moral standards. So it makes sense that this is just an intermediate conclusion and it supports this, which is the main conclusion. So we're going to take this to be our main conclusion. Let's see which of the options best corresponds to it. Okay, so we're looking for an option that corresponds to the young people should be setting the moral standards. Which of these options talks about who should be setting the moral standards? It's only C, it says they should be set by under 25s. And throughout the argument, the writer was basically using under 25s to mean young and over 25s to mean old. So that means it looks very much like C is the answer. Let's just quickly rule out the others. A is something the writer said, but we said it's actually supporting the conclusion, so that's not, sorry, it's not with E. This is something the writer said, but it's not the same as its conclusion, because it's not talking about who should set moral standards. Likewise, well, D is what other people were saying, that's not even the writer's opinion. B, moral standards have changed, so this is something the writer says, but they go on to argue about who should be setting the standards. And then A, they do argue this, but we said that this is only an intermediate conclusion, so that's not the answer either. So our answer here is C.